I ultimately got my nightmare neighbors arrested and evicted. And it all started with a free sample of herpes medication. It all began around 1996. When my boyfriend, Alex, and I first moved away from our tiny hometown, let's call it Armpit, to a slightly larger, but equally charming place we'll call Asscrack. We found an apartment in a massive old house that had been carved up into 5 or 6 separate units. We settled into our top-floor apartment. And just a few days later, we had a surprising discovery. Alex actually sort of knew the couple living on the ground floor. As it turned out, Alex had graduated high school with the woman. A blonde whose crunchy 80s perm seemed permanently frozen in time. Screaming, "Buy me a Seagrams." Let's call her Tiffany. And her male counterpart, Kevin. At the time, we didn't realize that they were the poster children for toxic entitlement. Initially, they seemed perfectly nice. We hung out a few times, hit the clubs, and I even managed to get Tiffany a job at the telemarketing company where I worked. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid almost double the minimum wage at the time. Our friendly neighborly dynamic took a sharp turn a couple of months in, when we stumbled upon their rather extensive opioid habit. I was at work one evening, suffering from a splitting headache. Tiffany came over to my desk during our break, as we usually ate together, and asked what was wrong. "I've just got this killer headache," I told her. "Do you have any Tylenol?" "Well, no," she said, leaning in conspiratorially. "But I do have a painkiller." Turns out, she was offering me hydrocodone. I politely declined. Over the next few days, this became her solution for everything. A stomachache? Have a painkiller. In a bad mood? A painkiller will fix that. That's when the pieces clicked into place. We started to realize that Tiffany and Kevin's entire existence revolved around their pill problem. It was the main topic of every conversation they had. We knew we didn't want to make enemies out of people who lived directly below us. So we began to subtly and quietly pull back from the friendship. Soon after, Tiffany was fired from the job. And that's when their entitled mooching kicked into high gear. It started small. They asked to borrow $20. We lent it to them. And they paid us back. No harm, no foul. But the requests didn't stop there. As one commenter on my story later pointed out, "There's a life lesson here. As soon as you find out someone has a drug problem that they aren't owning up to and dealing with, drop them. Otherwise, chances are they'll try to take advantage of you." We were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Their next big idea was to share their cable account. Since we all lived in the same building, they reasoned we could just run a splitter and an extra line up to our apartment, and no one would be the wiser. The plan was for us to take turns paying the monthly bill. Naturally, they insisted we go first. I hated the idea and had a sinking feeling about it. But I figured if, or more likely, when it went south, it would give us the perfect, undeniable excuse to cut them out of our lives for good. At that moment, I had no idea just how right I was, or how much chaos would unfold before that excuse finally worked. The final straw in our so-called friendship came a short time later. Tiffany showed up at our door, tears streaming down her face. She claimed Kevin was downstairs, an emotional wreck, because they had no food in the house for his children, who were visiting for the weekend. Alex and I weren't exactly domesticated back then. Our own kitchen wasn't a picture of domestic bliss. We were young, living on takeout and easy-to-make meals. so we had no groceries to give them. But we were soft-hearted and, frankly, naive. We felt horrible for the kids. So we lent them about $50 for food. The very next day, Tiffany was back. This time launching into a long monologue about Kevin's pill issue. Notice how it was his issue, not hers. This was a classic move. Shifting all the blame to preserve her own self-image. It revealed her greatest flaw, a total refusal to take responsibility, which would ultimately be the very thing that unraveled their entire world. Then, in the middle of her rant, she let something slip. She mentioned that Kevin had made her lie to her parents and say they needed food for the children just to get money for drugs. Alex and I just froze, looking at each other across the room. The air went still. We didn't say a single word to her. But inside, we were absolutely furious. We had been played. As another commenter so elegantly put it, how do you know if a junkie is lying to you? Their lips are moving. A few days later, our cable went out. Since the account was in Tiffany and Kevin's name, we went downstairs to their apartment to see what was going on. They immediately started hemming and hawing, trying to invent excuses on the spot. But it didn't take a genius to figure it out. The bill hadn't been paid in over 2 months. We had given them our share of the money for that month's bill. But they had clearly spent it on something else. I think we all know what. We ended up getting our own cable account. And they had the unbelievable audacity to ask if they could share with us this time. That was a hard, definite no. They became incredibly pushy about it. And some heated words were exchanged. It was far from a pleasant conversation. But it was the final justification we needed to sever all ties. The problem was, they wouldn't leave us alone. After weeks of their manipulation, we were now the villains. They started badmouthing us to the other tenants in the building. They stole random things from our cars, CDs, loose change, anything not nailed down. The worst part was the noise complaints. They would call the police on us for no reason, sending officers to bang on our door at 2 or 3 in the morning, waking us from a dead sleep just for their own petty revenge. After a few other incidents, I was just completely fed up. One night, as Alex and I were watching TV, a commercial for Valtrex came on. And suddenly, a beautifully wicked idea sparked in my mind. As it turned out, the company was offering a promotion where the first few doses of the anti-herpes medication were completely free. All you had to do was provide a name and an address, and they would mail out a free information packet and a voucher for the samples. We picked up the phone, dialed the number, gave them Kevin's name and their address. And then we sat back and waited. I know that subscribing people to junk mail is a bit of a cliché prank. And honestly, we didn't expect much to come of it. At most, we hoped for a big, dramatic blow-up. If we were really lucky, we thought, there might be a loud fight. Some accusations of cheating. If fortune truly smiled upon us, maybe, just maybe, they would finally break up. What we got was so much more. It was, in a word, glorious. About 10 days after we made the call, an enormous ruckus erupted from the yard below our window. We rushed over to look. Tiffany was in an absolute rage. She was in the front yard, screaming at Kevin at the top of her lungs, calling him every name you can possibly imagine. Kevin just stood there, looking completely helpless as she began throwing his belongings out of their ground floor apartment and onto the lawn. Clothes went flying everywhere. We watched as a television arced through the air and smashed on the sidewalk, followed by a lamp that shattered into 100 pieces. Tiffany, a blonde banshee in booty shorts, sat amidst the wreckage, cursing and screaming. We felt a deep sense of gratification when we clearly heard her shriek. "Which one of your feckin' hoes gave it to you?" Eventually, Kevin's hapless confusion turned to rage, and he lost his patience. The two of them started brawling right there in the middle of the street. Beer bottles were thrown. Fists were flying. At one point, a weave was snatched clean off. It was a scene straight out of the Jerry Springer show, unfolding right on our front lawn. Finally, the flashing blue and red lights arrived, and the police showed up. Tiffany and Kevin were promptly escorted into the city's free black and white cab service to spend the night in the county jail. But the story gets even better. Apparently, when the police intervened, they found the couple to be in possession of illegal prescription drugs. So, what started as a single night in a holding cell turned into a much longer stay. Imagine that. They never returned to the apartment building. We never saw or heard from them again. For all I know, they're still in jail. In the end, the situation taught me a valuable lesson: when people show you who they are, believe them. Trying to be kind to those determined to exploit you will only lead to your own suffering. Sometimes, a bit of creative problem solving is the only way to get the peace you deserve. So, what do you think? What's the most clever way you've ever dealt with a nightmare neighbor? Let us know in the comments below.